I had been preparing for that interview for 3 weeks straight, printing out my resume, practicing in front of the mirror until my voice stopped trembling, even borrowing a pair of heels from my friend so I'd look professional. It was my first real chance at a career after years of working dead-end shifts to support myself and my son. The position wasn't glamorous, but it was full-time, stable, and came with health insurance, something I hadn't had since high school. I kept telling myself, this is it. This is where things start to change. The morning of the interview, I woke up early, hair already in curlers, blouse pressed. My stomach was tight, but it wasn't just nerves. It was that mix of excitement and desperation when you know you can't afford to fail. I moved quietly around the kitchen, trying not to wake anyone. The last thing I wanted was my family's usual commentary about how people like me shouldn't dream too big. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video. But they were already awake. My dad sat at the table with his coffee, scrolling through his phone. My brother, Mason, was leaning against the counter in sweatpants, smirking like he knew something I didn't. My mom barely looked up from the crossword puzzle she was doing. "Where are you going all dressed up like that?" Dad's voice had that mocking edge that always made me feel like I was 10 years old again. "I have an interview," I said, forcing brightness into my tone. "Downtown, they're hiring for the administrative assistant position. It's a good company." Mason laughed. "Admin assistant? So, secretary? Thought you wanted a real job." "It is a real job," I said, but my voice cracked just enough for Dad to notice. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "You think you're better than everyone here because you're wearing a nice blouse? Don't forget who puts a roof over your head." I bit my tongue. The truth was, I was only still living here because rent anywhere else was impossible on my part-time pay. Every month, I handed over most of my paycheck to help with bills, though somehow Mason never had to contribute, even though he didn't have a job. I tried to ignore them and grab my purse from the hallway, but just as I passed the coat closet, Dad's hand shot out and gripped my arm, hard. "What's your rush?" His voice was too calm, too steady. That was always the warning before something bad. "I'll miss the bus," I said, pulling back. "Won't take long," he muttered, and then, before I could react, he yanked the closet door open and shoved me inside. My shoulder hit the wall, my heel caught on the edge of a box, and I stumbled into the dark. The door slammed behind me, and I heard the click of the lock. "Dad!" I slammed my hands against the wood. "Let me out!" Mason's voice came through, mocking. "Don't worry, sis. I'll go in your place. Somebody's got to represent the family." "That's my interview!" I shouted, panic clawing at my chest. I could hear the muffled sound of laughter outside Mason's deep and Dad's low and satisfied. "You don't deserve it," Dad said finally. "You'll fail anyway. Mason's more suited for that kind of thing. You'd just embarrass us." I felt like the air was being sucked out of the small space. My eyes strained to adjust in the dark, catching the outline of old coats, a vacuum, boxes stacked to the ceiling. The smell of mothballs and dust was choking me. I kept pounding on the door until my fists hurt, but no one answered. Through the thin crack at the bottom, I could hear movement, footsteps, the jingle of car keys, Mason's voice. "Wish me luck." Then the front door slammed and the house went quiet. I don't know how long I stayed there. It could have been an hour, maybe 2. My phone was in my purse outside. No way to call for help. At some point, I heard my mom pass by. I called out to her, my voice hoarse. "Mom, please, I'm locked in here." Her voice was flat. "Should have been up earlier. Maybe then you wouldn't have to rush." "I was up. They locked me in here." "Well, maybe you should have thought about how you talk to your father. Actions have consequences." And then her footsteps faded. When Dad finally opened the door, the light hit my eyes so hard I had to squint. He stood there like nothing had happened, sipping his coffee. "Miss your bus?" he asked, smirking. My knees were stiff from sitting on the floor. I stumbled past him without answering, straight to my room. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and saw the missed call from the company. They'd left a voicemail saying they'd moved on to the next candidate. I sank onto the bed, staring at the wall. In the other room, I could hear Dad and Mom congratulating Mason on getting the job. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat there, numb, listening to them celebrate while I imagined him sitting at the desk that was supposed to be mine. But under the numbness, something cold and sharp was forming. And I knew one thing: they were going to regret it. I didn't see Mason for the rest of that day. He came home late, smelling like overpriced cologne, bragging on the phone to one of his friends about how easy the interview was, and how the manager had liked his confidence. I sat on the couch pretending to scroll my phone, but I caught every word. My dad kept nodding along like Mason had climbed Mount Everest instead of stealing my shot at a normal life. The next morning, Mason waltzed into the kitchen in a brand new shirt, one I knew he couldn't have bought himself. Mom slid a plate of bacon and eggs in front of him without even asking if I wanted any. I got the leftover coffee in the pot, burnt and bitter. "So, when do you start?" Dad asked him, all smiles. "Monday," Mason said. "They said the pay's decent, but it's really the connections that matter. This is just a stepping stone, you know. Not like I plan to stay stuck as some admin drone." They all laughed. I kept my eyes on my coffee mug, fingers tightening around the handle until my knuckles ached. I'd spent years swallowing moments like this where their cruelty sat at the table like a fourth family member, eating better than I did. But this time, the humiliation didn't fade by morning. It was acid in my chest, and it burned hotter every time I saw Mason's smug face. By Monday, I'd made my decision. I didn't have the money or the connections they did, but I had something they'd always underestimated. I remembered every detail, every conversation, every loose thread they thought didn't matter. And Mason? He was a walking threadbare sweater. Pull one string and the whole thing would unravel. That morning I left the house before him. I knew the building where he'd be working, my building. I'd researched it obsessively back when it was still supposed to be mine. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, with glass doors so polished I could see my own reflection in them. I sat at the coffee shop across the street, nursing a drink I couldn't really afford, waiting. Sure enough, just before 9, Mason strolled in late, sipping an energy drink and talking loudly on his phone. His shirt was untucked, hair barely brushed. He didn't even bring a bag or notepad. That told me everything. The next few days, I made it my routine. I'd leave early, shadowing him from a distance, memorizing his patterns. He'd slip out for smoke breaks even though he didn't smoke, spend half his lunch flirting with the barista down the street. And once, I even caught him in the alley behind the building, laughing with friends instead of sitting at his desk. He was predictable, and predictability is a weapon if you put it in the right hands. By the end of the week, I had my in. One morning, I stopped by the building again, but instead of the coffee shop, I walked right inside. I didn't even have to lie much at the front desk, just smiled and said I was dropping something off for Mason Clark. The receptionist, a woman with kind eyes and a bored expression, waved me through. His desk was exactly where I thought it would be. Papers scattered everywhere, a sticky note on the monitor with his computer password all caps, his birth year, and the word king. It was almost insulting how easy he made it. I didn't touch anything. Not yet. I just stood there for a moment, looking around at the space I should have been sitting in. The framed company values on the wall: integrity, accountability, respect. I almost laughed. Then I left, smiling politely at the receptionist on my way out. I wasn't ready to strike yet, but I was close. That weekend, Mason came home bragging again, this time about how he'd been put in charge of a small client account because the manager thinks I'm a natural leader. I saw Dad beam like his son had just been crowned Prince of the City. They didn't notice me slipping out of the room. They didn't notice me quietly opening my laptop and starting a new document labeled Plan. Because by the time I was done, Mason wouldn't just lose that job. He'd lose every illusion he'd ever had about himself. And my parents? They'd watch the fall up close. The following Monday, the air in the house felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Mason was still half asleep when he shuffled into the kitchen, but I was already dressed, hair tied back, backpack slung over my shoulder. "Where are you going so early?" he mumbled, mouthful of toast. "Nowhere important," I said, smiling just enough for it to annoy him. He shrugged, too busy scrolling on his phone to notice the small flash drive I slipped into my pocket. I walked to the bus stop, but I didn't take the bus home like usual. I went straight to his building just like I had before. Only this time, I had a reason to be inside. Over the weekend, I'd done my homework. Every shady conversation Mason had had in public, every crude joke about milking the clock, every careless moment where he complained about his clients or coworkers, I'd caught them all. My phone's voice memo folder was full. The icing on the cake? Screenshots of his private group chats where he called his manager an airhead in heels and bragged about faking spreadsheets. I wasn't going to leak them online. That would have been too quick, too easy. No, this was going straight to the one person whose opinion could crush him completely, his manager. I timed it perfectly. Mason left for one of his smoke breaks around 10:15, so I walked right in, nodded at the receptionist like I belonged there, and went up to the 3rd floor. The manager's office door was open, and she was bent over a file. "Excuse me," I said softly. "I think you should see this. It's about Mason Clark." Her eyes sharpened instantly. I placed the flash drive on her desk and slid my phone over to show her a few choice screenshots. I didn't linger. I didn't have to. The look on her face told me she'd watch every file before the hour was up. When Mason came home that night, he wasn't bragging. He was silent. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie shoved into his pocket, and he walked straight past Dad's eager questions. I caught the faint red in his eyes. But I wasn't done. The next morning, while my parents were out grocery shopping, I left an envelope on the kitchen table. Inside were printouts of every single thing Mason had done wrong at that job, neatly labeled and dated, along with a short note in my handwriting. "This is what your golden boy does with opportunities that weren't his to take." When my parents came home, I stayed in my room, listening to their voices rise and then fall into heavy, uneasy silence. They didn't calm me down. By the end of the week, Mason was back on the couch, unemployed, sulking in sweatpants. Dad didn't bring him bacon and eggs anymore. Mom didn't ask about his bright future. They didn't even look at him the same way. One night, I passed him in the hallway. He muttered, "You'll pay for this." I stopped, turned, and met his eyes. "You already did," I said. And I kept walking, leaving him standing there, clutching nothing just like me in that locked closet. The only difference was, I'd found my way out. He never would. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video.